Dawn paints the hills of the Peloponnese in shades of pink and gold. A silence so profound that every rustle of the wind in the grass can be heard envelops this land. Somewhere there, at the foot of a sacred mountain, ancient stones hold the secrets of centuries. What is this place where time itself seems to stand still, listening to itself? Where do the gazes of those who first set foot on this land turn, sensing its special energy? This is not just land. This is a cradle where myths are born, where heroes are born, where the breath of the gods is felt in every breath of the breeze. A new era is dawning, an era when the silence before dawn becomes more than just a lull, but a harbinger of great events. Anticipation hangs in the air. Anticipation of something momentous, something that will change the course of history. Just as silence foretells a thunderstorm, or as a long winter gives way to the awakening of spring, so too is this calm before the storm of change. Everything stands still, as if the world is holding its breath. No one could have foreseen that it was here, on this earth, that their legend would begin. A legend that would echo through the centuries, resonating in the hearts of generations. Here, under the shadow of Olympus, where the sky seems closer and the stars brighter, their journey to immortality begins. The land around Olympus pulsed with quiet anticipation. The sun, as if reluctantly, broke the eastern horizon, drawing long shadows from the ancient trees. The air still held the cool of the night, but already held the promise of coming warmth. Here, in this valley, where nature itself seemed to hold its breath, something greater than a mere event was being born. It was an echo of the most ancient human need, the desire for perfection, for demonstrating strength and dexterity, for self-understanding through trial and error. Initially, this wasn't a competition in the modern sense. It was a ritual. Deeply rooted in pagan beliefs, it served as a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the gods. Heroes, whose names would be whispered for generations, set foot on this land not for glory, but to fulfill a duty, to appease higher powers. Their deeds were prayer, their sweat a sacrifice. In every movement, in every cry, in every tense muscle, resounded the hope for the favor of the gods. Imagine this scene, a clearing surrounded by centuries-old olive trees, their silvery leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. In the center is a sacred altar where the embers of the night's fires still smolder. People are gathering around it, not a crowd, but rather a community bound by a shared faith and shared hopes. Their faces, weathered and tanned, reflect the gravity of the moment. There is no room for fuss here. Every step, every glance is filled with meaning. The first games were modest. Perhaps they were merely stone-throwing, a display of strength, or a running race to test speed and endurance. But even in this simplicity, there was a sense of grandeur. This was more than just a competition, but an attempt to comprehend divine harmony through the human body. Strength, speed, agility, all these reflected the qualities people believed the gods themselves possessed. Over time, as the fame of this sacred place grew, so did the ritual itself. People began to come from far and wide, bringing with them their skills and traditions. Culture gradually permeated this primitive ritual, giving it new forms. Gradually, very gradually, the echoes of pure ritual began to give way to something more organized. Rules emerged, albeit unwritten, but understood by all. The narrator's voice, calm and deep, like an echo from the past, continues. Imagine the first ray of sun touching the summit of Olympus, its light stretching like a golden thread across the valley. At that moment, when the world was awakening, a new dimension of human existence was born. It was a time when heroes, like stars, appeared in the sky to illuminate the path of their compatriots. Their striving for excellence was not simply a personal desire, but a reflection of the collective will, the aspiration of the entire polis for greatness. The dawn of heroes, that's how you could describe this period. A period when the line between the divine and the human seemed thinner than ever. When every athlete, stepping into the makeshift arena, felt the gaze of not only the spectators, but the Olympian gods themselves. It was a time when the body became a temple and the spirit a weapon. The scent of wild herbs and sacred smoke still hung in the air. The distant sound of the sea mingled with the whisper of leaves. It was the music of antiquity, a melody that accompanied the birth of something new. The birth of games that would become a symbol of human potential, an eternal reminder that even the most humble beginnings can conceal the seed of something truly great. And this dawn, painted in delicate tones, marked the beginning of a journey that would long illuminate the path of humanity. Silence precedes change, and time begins to flow more quickly once again. Imagine the first ray of sun touching the summit of Olympus, its light stretching like a golden thread across the valley. At that moment, as the world awakened, a new dimension of human existence was born. It was a time when heroes, like stars, appeared in the sky to illuminate the path for their compatriots. Their drive for excellence was not simply a personal desire, but a reflection of a collective will, the aspiration of the entire polis for greatness. The dawn of heroes, that's how you could describe this period. A period when the line between the divine and the human seemed thinner than ever. When every athlete, stepping into the makeshift arena, felt the gaze of not only the spectators, but the Olympian gods themselves. It was a time when the body became a temple and the spirit a weapon. The scent of wild herbs and sacred smoke still hung in the air. The distant sound of the sea mingled with the whisper of leaves. It was the music of antiquity, a melody that accompanied the birth of something new, the birth of games that would become a symbol of human potential, an eternal reminder that even the most humble beginnings can conceal the seed of something truly great. And this dawn, painted in delicate tones, marked the beginning of a journey that would long illuminate the path of humanity. Centuries later, when the echoes of ritual had faded and the rules had become clearer, a new era dawned. Athletes stepped onto specially prepared fields, their bodies forged by training and their minds focused. The path to glory became ever clearer, paved with sweat and perseverance. This wasn't just a sport. It was a philosophy of life embodied in movement. Every step, every kick, every effort carried profound meaning. An athlete's spirit was like a rock, unshakable in the face of any challenge. It was forged in long hours of solitude, in meditation under the scorching sun, in overcoming pain and fatigue. It was the art of self-control, the ability to manage one's emotions when the adrenaline was pumping and the crowd was roaring. Willpower was the invisible engine that propelled one forward, forcing one to rise after a fall, to run faster when one's strength was at its lowest. It was forged in the fire of doubt and fear, and grew stronger with each new challenge. The ancient Greeks believed the body was a gift from the gods and should be revered. Athletes strove for perfect physical fitness, honing every muscle, developing flexibility and endurance. Their training was rigorous but necessary. They spent hours on the training grounds, practicing gymnastics, running, and wrestling. Each day brought new lessons, a renewed understanding of their body's capabilities. In the morning, as the first shadows lengthened across the earth, they were already on their feet, ready for new challenges. The sound of the ball hitting the ground, the creaking of leather straps, the heavy breathing, all of it became music to their ears. They learned to sense their bodies, anticipate their reactions, and work in harmony with them. This wasn't just physical development, but spiritual as well. Through training, they learned about themselves, their strengths and weaknesses. They learned patience, discipline, and dedication. During this time, athletic games, especially the Olympic Games, gained increasing importance. They became more than just a competition, but a celebration uniting city-states. Athletes who came from various corners of Greece brought with them not only their skills, but also the spirit of their city-state. The victory of one athlete was a victory for their entire city. This engendered a tremendous sense of pride and unity. Before each competition, the athletes performed purification rites. They made sacrifices to the gods, praying for favor and strength. Faith in divine intervention was an integral part of their preparation. They knew that even the strongest body and the most determined will require support from above. Their prayers were quiet but sincere, filled with hope and awe. Imagine an athlete standing at the starting line. The sun is blazing, dust is in the air. The noise of the crowd is muffled, like the distant roar of waves. He feels his own heartbeat, like a drum counting down the final moments before the start. His gaze is fixed forward, on the goal, on that cherished finish line that signifies glory. In this moment, all unnecessary things recede. Only he, his body, his spirit, and his will remain, united in the desire for victory. Training wasn't just physical labor, it was a spiritual practice. Athletes learned to overcome pain and persevere in the face of adversity. They understood that true strength lies not only in muscles, but also in mental fortitude. This spirit was forged through long hours of grueling exercise, in moments of despair when it seemed they had no more strength. But precisely when they were ready to give up, their will prevailed. Their breathing became more even, their hearts calmer. their gaze focused, cutting out all unnecessary distractions. It was a state of total immersion when time slowed and the world around them ceased to exist. Only movement remained, only the goal. And this path, the path to glory, was not just a competition for them, but life itself, filled with meaning, honor, and the pursuit of perfection. The athletes' entire lives were dedicated to this path. From their youth, when they began training under the guidance of experienced mentors, to their mature years when they became role models. They knew that their body was an instrument, and their spirit was a compass guiding them to their goal. And this goal, glory, was not just a fleeting recognition, but an eternal legacy that would live on in the memory of generations. The path to glory was long and arduous. It required sacrifice, self-denial, and total commitment. But the reward they received was worth all the effort. It was not only recognition of their athletic achievements, but also respect for their character, their will, and their spirit. They became heroes whose names were celebrated in songs and legends. And when the athlete stood victorious on the podium, a wreath on his head, he felt not only fatigue, but also deep satisfaction. It was a moment of triumph when all his efforts, all his suffering found meaning. He knew that this moment, fleeting though it was, would remain in his memory forever, a symbol of his journey, his struggle, and his victory. And this triumph, shining like the sun, illuminated not only himself, but the entire world around him. A change of era approaches, like a breath of wind across the steppe. The storm of competition is already in the air, heralding a storm of passions where only the fine line between fair play and cruelty reigns. Olympus, majestic and ancient, has always been an arena where human strength and spirit were tested to the limit. Here, under the watchful gaze of the gods, heroes were born and legends were forged. But every victory had its price, sometimes exorbitantly high. The tension grew with each passing day. Spectators gathered from all corners of Greece held their breath. Anticipation hung in the air, thick as summer heat. The athletes, clad in simple loincloths, seemed carved from stone. Their bodies, honed by years of grueling training, were the embodiment of strength and grace. But behind this outward serenity raged passions, the thirst for victory, the fear of defeat, pride and ambition. Rules established over centuries were intended to ensure justice, but even the strictest laws could not tame the wild nature of human ambition. Judges, clad in stern robes, stood guard over order, their gazes as sharp as blades. They closely monitored every movement, every gesture, ready at any moment to interrupt the fight, impose a fine, or even disqualify an unscrupulous participant. But even their vigilance could not always prevent tragedy. The degree of brutality permitted in competitions varied. Some sports, such as running or discus throwing, demanded precision, speed, and endurance, where the main opponent was oneself. Others, like boxing or pankration, were a true test of endurance, where the boundaries of pain were erased, and the human body became a battlefield, where blood mixed with sweat on the scorching ground, and the roar of the crowd drowned out the groans. Justice often gave way to the instinct for survival. The air was thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and fear. Every athlete knew what they were getting into. They understood they could return home with a victory wreath, celebrated as heroes, or remain forever in the land of Olympus, a reminder of the fragility of human life. This duality, this play with death, gave the Olympic Games a special, dark appeal. Imagine the lush green hills of the Peloponnese, bathed in golden sunlight. At the center of this splendor is a sacred grove where temples and altars rise. Here, on this blessed land, the most ancient and revered competitions are held. Athletes whose names are already celebrated throughout Greece prepare to enter the arena. They are not just athletes, they are ambassadors of their cities, the embodiment of their strength and spirit. The sounds around are the rustling of leaves, the whisper of the wind, the distant voices of the spectators, their impatient anticipation. Then the roar grows like an approaching thunderstorm. The gladiators appear, their bodies glistening with oil. In their eyes there's determination, but also a hint of anxiety. This isn't just a game. It's a battle for honor, for glory, for existence itself. The rules seem simple. Do not cause fatal injury to your opponent. Do not resort to illegal techniques. But in the heat of battle, when the adrenaline is pumping and the thirst for victory clouds reason, these rules often turn out to be mere formalities. Wrestlers, their muscles strained to the limit, lock in mortal combat. Their bodies intertwine into a single ball of force, each striving to break the opponent's will. A sharp, precise blow echoes across the arena. The crowd erupts in cheers. The referee watches, expressionless. He is a guardian of order, but at the same time a witness to this wild, primal struggle. He knows that before him are not mere men, but the embodiment of ancient forces striving for dominance. В кулачном бою, где перчатки, обмотанные кожей, превращали кулаки в смертоносное оружие, каждое попадание было подобно удару молота. Лица атлетов распухали, кровь текла ручьями, но они продолжали биться, подгоняемые не только желанием победить, но и страхом опозориться перед своими соотечественниками. Здесь не было пощады, не было жалости. Была только воля к победе, любой ценой. Панкратион же, сплав борьбы и кулачного боя, возводил эту жестокость на новый уровень. Здесь разрешалось практически все: удушение, выкручивание суставов, удары в любые части тела. Единственным ограничением был страх смерти, но и он часто отступал перед натиском неудержимой страсти. Атлеты, подобно мифическим чудовищам, терзали друг друга. Их тела превращались в израненные, но не сломленные статуи. Но даже в этой дикой мясорубке существовал свой кодекс чести. Если один из бойцов падал, признавая свое поражение, или оказывался не в состоянии продолжать, противник должен был остановиться.
Предательство этого негласного договора каралось сурово, ибо честь была отделима от славы. Эта тонкая грань между дикостью и цивилизацией, между инстинктом и разумом, делала Олимп местом, где человек познавал пределы своего существа. И вот, когда последний бой завершен, и победитель, окровавленный, но торжествующий, поднимает руки к небу, толпа взрывается ликованием. Это эхо древних времен, когда сила и доблесть решали все. Это момент, когда правила игры, какими бы суровыми они ни были, отходят на второй план, уступая место чистому, первозданному триумфу. Смена эпохи приближается, и эти грозные состязания — лишь предвестие грядущих перемен, когда прежний порядок вещей начнет рассыпаться подобно песку, уносимому ветром. A silence, like a deep sigh before a storm, envelops Olympus. Every muscle tensed, every gaze focused.
Time seemed to slow, giving the athletes a final moment of peace before what could be their last fight. The scent of sweat, earth, and crushed herbs mingled in the air, creating a rich, almost tangible aroma. The sun, like an observer, casts long shadows across the sandy field where blood is about to be spilled. The wind died down, heralding change, and the silence grew even more tense. This was more than just a competition. It was a test of human limits, where victory was worth more than life itself. Fist-fighting, brutal and merciless, demanded not only strength from the fighters, but also incredible endurance. Blows rained down like hammers on heads and bodies, leaving bruises and abrasions in their wake. Every block, every dodge, a story of struggle, a story of overcoming pain. The spectators, holding their breath, followed every movement, feeling the echoes of the blows in their own bodies. The fighters' faces, contorted with tension, were masks of determination. The sound of blows, dull and heavy, echoed throughout the arena, drowning out the whispers of the crowd. The victor rose, his body covered in sweat and dust, but his eyes blazed with triumph. But even in this chaos of brutality, there was an unwritten law: respect for the fallen opponent. If a fighter, defeated but not broken, raised his hand, signaling surrender, the battle ended. Violating this rule was tantamount to betrayal, a disgrace that no victory could erase. Pancration, a product of two elements, fist-fighting and wrestling, raised this ordeal to a new level. Here, there were no taboos except one: death. Chokes, painful holds, strikes to the most vulnerable spots, all were permitted. The athletes, like the gladiators of myth, tore each other apart, their bodies transformed into wounded but unbroken statues. It was a dance of strength and pain, where every movement could prove fatal. Every swing of the arm, every grip, a story of a desperate struggle for survival. The fighter's eyes burned with a wild fire, reflecting the full fury of the fight. But even in this brutal carnage, with bodies battered and spirits at their breaking point, a spark of honor remained. Victory achieved in this way was sweeter, but its price was immeasurably higher. The feel of the earth beneath their feet, the smell of sweat, the sound of blows, all of it wove into a single symphony of pain and triumph. When one of the fighters, exhausted, fell to the sand, admitting defeat, the fight died down. At that moment, when all is quiet, and the victor, bloodied but triumphant, raises his hands to the sky, the crowd erupts in jubilation. This is an echo of ancient times, when strength and valor decided everything. This is the moment when the rules of the game, no matter how harsh, fade into the background, giving way to pure, primordial triumph. A change of era is approaching, and these formidable competitions are but a harbinger of things to come, when the old order of things will begin to crumble like sand blown by the wind. Time begins to flow faster again, accelerating its inexorable run. The wind, like an invisible conductor, began its symphony over the ancient stadium. It rustled the grass, played with the dust, raising it in a light curtain, and touched the bodies of the athletes preparing for new challenges. After the furious bouts of fistfights and the all-encompassing pankration, where the boundaries of what was permitted blurred in a bloody fog, came another test. A test where fortitude intertwined with physical strength, but in a different, more harmonious form. It was a time of speed, endurance, and precision. A time when athletes strove for an ideal embodied in movement. Running, a simple yet perfect form of competition with roots in ancient times. It was man's first step toward self-expansion, toward conquering space. At the Olympic Games, running held a special place. Its rhythm set the pulse of the entire celebration. From short sprints where every step was an explosion of energy, to long distances that demanded not only power, but also an unwavering will. Athletes like swift arrows shot out of the starting blocks, their bodies becoming one with the running, their muscles tensed, their breath quickened, turning into a powerful, steady stream. The sand beneath their feet rose, creating clouds that seemed to accompany them on their way to the finish line. Each finish was a culmination, a moment when the body, exhausted but unbroken, crossed an invisible line, and the hearts of the spectators beat in unison with their own. Victory in running was pure, undeniable. She talked about speed, about determination, about the ability to overcome all obstacles in the way. But the true embodiment of the ideal, the pinnacle of physical and spiritual perfection, was the pentathlon. 5 challenges, 5 facets of a single athlete. More than just a set of disciplines, it was a philosophy where each element complemented the other, creating a complete hero. The pentathlon demanded of the athlete not only strength, but also grace, not only endurance, but also intellect. It was like a mosaic assembled from the fragments of perfection. The first test of the pentathlon was the run, the very same run we've been talking about. Here, it served as a warm-up, setting the pace for the entire competition, awakening body and spirit. Afterward, the athletes moved on to the long jump. It was a spectacle full of grace and power. The athletes took off, picked up speed, and at the moment of takeoff, they spread their wings like birds. Their bodies curved in the air, demonstrating amazing agility. The dumbbells they held in their hands, swinging them during takeoff and landing, played a special role. These stones, carefully selected by weight, helped increase the distance of the jump, giving it additional momentum.
Each leap was a work of art, where the power of nature and human skill merged. The crowd watched each leap, holding their breath in anticipation of the athlete touching the ground. Then came the discus throw. This round, time-polished apparatus seemed to have a life of its own. The athlete, spinning like a whirlwind, poured all his strength into each movement. The discus, torn from his hands, sliced through the air with a deafening whistle, racing as far as possible. It was a test of technique, strength, and precision. Every spin, every throw, the result of long training, honing the movements to perfection. The spectators watched the discus's flight, their gaze following it to its landing, assessing every meter. The next discipline was the javelin throw. Here, in addition to strength, accuracy was also required. The javelin, light and swift, seemed like an extension of the thrower's arm. The athlete, gaining speed, made a powerful throw, directing the javelin toward the target. Sometimes, to increase the throw's range, a leather loop was attached to the shaft, which the athlete grasped with his fingers, imparting additional spin to the javelin. The javelin's flight was a mesmerizing spectacle, cutting through the air like lightning, striving to strike the farthest point. And finally, the culmination of the pentathlon, the final chord, was the wrestling. It was here, after all the trials, where speed, strength, agility, and accuracy had already been demonstrated, that the true champion was determined. Wrestling in the context of the pentathlon was not just a fight, but a test of endurance and spirit. Tired but unbroken, the athletes entered the duel, where every mistake could cost them victory. It was here, on the ground, in direct confrontation, that the true essence of a hero was revealed. The winner of the pentathlon was considered the most perfect athlete. He embodied all the ideals of the ancient Greek world: beauty, strength, intelligence, and harmony. His fame resounded throughout Greece, and his name was etched into the annals of history. He became a role model, a symbol of human potential. His victory was seen not simply as a personal triumph, but also as a manifestation of divine favor, a confirmation that perfection was possible. These competitions, the running and the pentathlon, were more than just sporting events. They were a mirror reflecting the values of the ancient world. They taught young men to be strong, fast, agile, and, most importantly, noble. They instilled in them a spirit of competition, but a fair competition, where victory was achieved through hard work and skill, not deceit. These were days when the world paused to admire the greatness of the human body and spirit, when legends were born in the arena. And the wind, the same wind that rustled the grass, continued its eternal movement, carrying with it the echoes of these great achievements, to pass them on to future generations. Silence precedes change, and time begins to flow more quickly once again. The ancient arenas, recently reverberating with the roar of the crowd and the clash of metal, were now plunged into a different state. Not just a lull, but a deep, almost tangible anticipation. The air, still holding the warmth of past competitions, suddenly grew thicker, filled with a new anticipation. It was in these moments, when the last echoes of the race and the pentathlon faded, when the athletes, exhausted but proud, left the sand, that the time came for those whose strength was like the primordial might of the earth, whose technique was born of instinct and age-old wisdom, a time for struggle and thrashing. Here, in the same arena where speed and endurance had recently been measured, another facet of human perfection was now revealed. Wrestling is an ancient art, rooted in the times when humans first experienced their own physical strength, when the first hunters grappled with wild beasts, when tribes fought for territory.
On Olympus, wrestling was more than just a display of muscle. It was a dance of strength where every muscle, every sinew was strained to the limit, where the body became a single instrument honed to perfection. Wrestlers, their bodies sculpted by years of training, stepped onto a circular plot of land covered in soft sand. Their skin glistened with oil, reflecting the sun's rays, making them resemble bronze statues brought to life under the gaze of gods and men. The essence of wrestling was to seize control, not simply grab the opponent, but to find a weak spot and use their own strength against them. Techniques varied from limb holds to chokes. Everything was permitted except one, striking. The goal was to force the opponent's back or shoulder to the ground. This required not only colossal strength, but also incredible flexibility, agility, and strategic thinking. The wrestlers studied each other with their eyes, trying to anticipate the next move, to find the moment for a decisive break. Every hold was a story, every attempted sweep a drama. Spectators froze as two bodies intertwined in a frantic dance, muscles tensing and breathing ragged. It was a spectacle of primal power, constrained by strict rules, where respect for the opponent was as important as the desire to win. Technique occupied a special place in wrestling. Relying solely on brute force was not an option. Understanding the physics of movement, knowing how to use body weight, and how to distribute the load were crucial. Experienced wrestlers knew how to turn weakness into strength, dodging powerful attacks and redirecting their opponent's energy. They were like snakes, writhing and elusive, capable of delivering a fatal bite at the most unexpected moment. Their movements reflected 1,000 years of history, accumulated by experienced instructors and passed down from generation to generation. It was an art that required not only physical preparation, but also a deep understanding of the human body and its capabilities. But wrestling was only one of the pinnacles of strength. Closely intertwined with it were the throwing events. There was no direct contact between bodies, but the same primal power was channeled to overcome distance. And the primary weapon was the discus. The discus throw is more than just the toss of a heavy object. It's a complex, graceful dance requiring perfect coordination of the entire body. The athlete grasped a discus carved from stone or bronze with a smooth surface and sharp edges. He stood, spinning in place, gathering momentum. It seemed as if the sun itself stood still, watching this moment. Then came a sharp, swift turn. The body bent, muscles tensed like the strings of an ancient bow. The athlete's gaze focused on the point where the discus would fly. And then, at the moment of greatest tension, the discus lifted from his hand. It described a majestic arc in the air, spinning with incredible speed, cutting through the air. The sound it emitted was like the whisper of the wind before a storm. The athlete's task was simple: throw the discus as far as possible. But execution required not only strength, but also technique. It was important to hold the discus correctly, give it the right speed of rotation, and calculate the throwing angle. The discus, a symbol of fertility and eternal movement, flew, conquering space. Its flight was a spectacle that made the spectators' hearts beat faster. Every meter added to the previous throw evoked a wave of admiration. Discus throwers were renowned for their strength and precision. They spent hours honing their movements, striving for perfection. Their bodies were powerful yet flexible, capable of performing this complex, multi-stage throw. But the discus wasn't the only implement. There was also the javelin throw. This required a different technique, a different approach. The javelin, long and sharp, demanded precision and aim. The athlete held it by a strap wrapped around the shaft to give it extra speed. A run-up, a sharp throw, and the javelin shot forward like lightning. Unlike the discus, here the importance lay not so much in range as in hitting the target. Sometimes the target was a pillar, sometimes a specially designated area. Throwing the javelin required strength, but more so dexterity and visual acuity. These two events, wrestling and throwing, formed the core of strength and technique at the ancient Greek games. They demonstrated not only the athlete's physical prowess, but also their ability to learn, to hone their skills, and to achieve perfection through hard work. There was no room for chance. Every throw, every catch was the result of years of training, a deep understanding of their bodies, and the laws of physics. When the final bouts of the fight ended, when the last discuses and spears found their marks, the arena was once again plunged into silence. But this was a different kind of silence, a silence of satisfaction, a silence of admiration. The air, filled with the scent of sweat and dust, now carried the echoes of victories and defeats, the echoes of strength and mastery. A silence that prepared the ground for new stories, for new legends. And somewhere there, beyond the mountains, the sun continued its journey, illuminating the land that held the memory of every movement, every effort, every triumph. The final swings of the hand, marking the discus's trajectory. The final steps, measuring the distance for the leap. The final cries, spurring the wrestlers on. All this faded, giving way to another, more complex game. A game where the arena was not only the sand of the stadium, but also the fate of entire cities. Where the stakes were not olive leaf wreaths, but peace or war. Olympus, the site of sacred competitions, was also a crossroads of political intrigue, a meeting place for rulers whose decisions determined the course of history. Here he is, the renowned commander, whose name inspires fear in his enemies and trepidation in his allies. He walks, clad in sumptuous robes, but his gaze is as sharp as a blade. He doesn't look at the athletes. He looks at the other arrivals, assessing their strength, their influence, their intentions. Beside him, barely visible, stands his ambassador. his eyes gleaming with cunning. They are not here merely for the spectacle. They are here to weave their threads, to forge alliances, to plot. And here comes another ruler, more modest, but no less influential. His lands are fertile, his people are strong. He seeks support, he offers aid. His hands, accustomed to farming, now firmly grip the hilt of a sword. He knows that the peace that reigns on Olympus during the games is fragile as glass, and that behind this calm, storm clouds can lurk. A sacred truce, the Ekashiria, was declared before the start of the games. It was intended to ensure safe passage for athletes and spectators. But the truce did not mean a complete cessation of political activity. On the contrary, it created a unique opportunity for meetings, negotiations, and the exchange of messages that could not be conveyed at any other time. City-states, rivals on the battlefield, could now temporarily lay aside their weapons and engage in dialogue, albeit tense. Imagine these men, whose nations could have found themselves on opposite sides of the barricades just a few months later, sitting around the same table today, sharing food, discussing athletic achievements. It was a delicate game, where every word carried weight, where every gesture could be interpreted as a sign of friendship or enmity. Athletes, focused on their upcoming trials, often failed to recognize the grand political drama unfolding around them. For them, achieving personal glory was paramount, but their victories and defeats could have far-reaching consequences for their home cities. A city's victory could bolster its prestige and influence, attract new allies, and weaken its rivals. A defeat, on the other hand, could spark internal strife or even war. Influential citizens, patrons of the arts, and wealthy merchants all had their own interests. They supported athletes and made generous donations, but they did so not only out of a love of sport. It was a way to demonstrate their wealth, their influence, and their loyalty to certain political forces. Athletic competitions sometimes became the source of open conflict. For example, controversial refereeing decisions could anger the crowd, which, fueled by political passions, could escalate from shouting to violence. Sometimes, in the heat of battle, athletes, forgetting the sacred truce, would resort to prohibited techniques, which could be perceived as a provocation by their polis. But more often than not, the games served precisely the purpose of strengthening peace, albeit temporary. They gave peoples the opportunity to meet, to feel a sense of community, to realize that, despite political differences, they were united by a common culture, common gods, and common heroes. Athletes representing different cities competed against each other, but they were part of a single Hellenic world. Their competitions were a reminder that strength and valor were values inherent in all Greeks. Here on Mount Olympus, more than just a sporting event was taking place. It was a complex, multifaceted process where faith, sport, politics, and human passions intertwined. This was a place where destinies were decided, where alliances were forged, where conflicts arose, and where, for a time, peace reigned. The air was filled with the scent of incense, mingling with the scent of sweat and earth. The roar of the crowd, the voices of the commentators, the cries of support, all of it blended into a single symphony, resounding against the backdrop of majestic mountains and a clear sky. And somewhere far away, beyond the horizon, new events were already brewing that could change the entire course of history. In the evenings, as the sun began to set, painting the sky crimson and gold, a special tranquility reigned in the arena. The athletes, tired but proud, returned to their camps. Rulers and ambassadors continued their secret conversations in the shade of the olive groves. The stars began to glow in the darkening sky, like thousands of eyes observing this earthly bustle. And in this silence, under the cover of night, the invisible yet so significant game continued, where political intrigue was as intense as the athletic matches during the day. Each Olympic cycle was a microcosm of the entire Hellenic world, with its constant striving for perfection, its internal contradictions, and its ability to unite in the face of common challenges. The games were more than just a contest of strength and skill. They were a mirror reflecting the complexity of ancient Greek life, their faith in the gods, their desire for glory, and their inevitable entanglement in the maelstrom of political events. And each time the games concluded, the world took with it not only the memories of the heroes, but also the invisible fruits of diplomatic encounters that could shape the destinies of entire generations. The silence before dawn can be deceptive. It is like a deep breath before a great achievement, when everything stills, gathering its strength. So Olympus, the eternal witness of Hellenic life, prepared for the next manifestation of its will. The gods, denizens of shining peaks, watched the bustle of mortals from a height beyond comprehension. Their gazes, sometimes gentle, sometimes threatening, pierced time, penetrating the hearts of those who believed. Priests, intermediaries between worlds, performed their rituals in the dim light of temples. Incense smoke curled toward the high vaults, carrying prayers and petitions. They were guardians of ancient secrets, interpreters of omens, conduits of the divine will. Their hands, stained with the blood of sacrifices, bore the burden of responsibility for the well-being of the city-states. And below, on the sacred ground of Olympia, spectators gathered. They were numerous, like ants flocking to a honeycomb. They came from afar, crossing seas and mountains, driven by faith and hope. Their eyes reflected awe of the unknown, the anticipation of a miracle. For them, the games were more than just a sporting spectacle. They were a sacred act, a moment when the divine touched the mundane. They saw the athletes as their heroes, the embodiment of ideals, messengers of the gods. Every gesture, every step, every effort in the arena was interpreted through the prism of faith. Anticipation hung in the air, thick and palpable. It mingled with the scents of flowers, roasted meat, and the salty sea breeze wafting from the distant coast. The crowd buzzed like a hive of bees, each soul alive with anticipation. Some hoped to witness a miracle, others a fellow countryman triumphant. Others sought omens, answers to their questions sent by the gods. The priests, clad in their ritual robes, moved among the people like ghosts, their voices soft but commanding. They reminded them of the sacredness of the place, of the rules established by the Olympians themselves. During these days, Olympia became the center of the world. Politicians and philosophers, merchants and artisans, warriors and peasants, all were fused into a single mass of believers. Political rivalries receded before the grandeur of the games. Warring city-states declared a temporary truce so that their citizens could reach the sacred site unhindered. It was an act of profound respect for the gods and for the very idea of competition. Athletes preparing for their performances felt the gaze of thousands of eyes upon them. Their every muscle, every movement was under scrutiny. They knew that their bodies, their spirit, their will, a gift from the gods, to be displayed in all their glory. The priests closely monitored all the rituals. They knew that the gods favored those who honored their traditions. Purification, sacrifices, prayers, all were part of a complex mechanism that maintained harmony between the worlds of man and the gods. Athletes underwent purification rituals, bathing in sacred waters so that their bodies would be worthy of competition. Their priests performed special ceremonies, praying to the gods for favor and strength. At this moment, they felt part of something greater than just a sporting competition. They were ambassadors of their cities, bearers of their honor and glory. Spectators watched every movement with bated breath. They saw in the athletes a reflection of their own aspirations, their hopes, and their fears. Victory for one was a celebration for many, defeat a shared grief. The games were more than just a celebration of strength and agility. They were a mirror reflecting the complexity of ancient Greek life, their faith in the gods, their desire for glory, and their inevitable entanglement in the maelstrom of political events. Each Olympic cycle was a microcosm of the entire Hellenic world, with its constant striving for perfection, its internal contradictions, and its ability to unite in the face of common challenges. The athletes, their performances complete, returned to their camps. Tired but proud, they bore the weight of glory. Rulers and ambassadors continued their secret conversations in the shade of the olive groves. In the evenings, as the sun began to set, painting the sky crimson and gold, a special tranquility reigned in the arena. Stars began to glow in the darkening sky, like thousands of eyes observing this earthly bustle. And in this silence, under the cover of night, the invisible yet so significant game continued, where political intrigue was as intense as the athletic matches during the day. Each Olympic cycle was a microcosm of the entire Hellenic world, with its constant striving for perfection, its internal contradictions, and its ability to unite in the face of common challenges. The games were more than just a contest of strength and skill. They were a mirror reflecting the complexity of ancient Greek life, their faith in the gods, their desire for glory, and their inevitable entanglement in the maelstrom of political events. And each time the games concluded, the world took with it not only the memories of the heroes, but also the invisible fruits of diplomatic encounters that could shape the destinies of entire generations. Faith and expectation, that's what drove this ancient machine, setting the wheels of history in motion. The Olympic Games had reached their zenith, a golden age, a time when the glory of athletes shone brighter than the sun over the Peloponnese. It was a time when the very concept of greatness took concrete form on the sacred soil of Olympia. The arena, like the heart of the world, beat in unison with the pulse of thousands of spectators. The air was permeated with the scent of heated sand, sweat, and laurel wreaths. Every heartbeat, every breath of an athlete, every cheer of the crowd, all of it wove into a symphony of triumph. Victory at Olympia was more than just a personal achievement. It became a symbol, an echo that resonated throughout all Hellenic city-states. The brave heroes whose names were inscribed on marble slabs brought honor not only to themselves, but also to their cities. Their bodies, honed by long training, were living embodiments of the ideals of beauty and strength. Their spirit, forged in struggle, was indestructible. It was these qualities, this unwavering will, that distinguished true champions. Symbols of Olympia were everywhere. A laurel wreath, woven from branches of the sacred tree, became the highest award, more precious than gold. It spoke of glory, of immortality in the memory of generations. Statues of victors, erected on sacred ground, captured their mighty figures forever. These sculptures did more than simply adorn Olympia. They served as a reminder of what a dedicated person could achieve. Every muscle, every curve of the sculptor's body conveyed the tension of battle and the triumph in its aftermath. Athletes returning home with wreaths on their heads were greeted as heroes. Their cities held lavish celebrations. Poets sang of their exploits. Artists captured their images. They became living legends, role models. Their fame was not only a momentary surge of popular adoration, but also a long-lasting, flickering light illuminating the history of their city-state. Beyond athletic triumphs, the golden age of Olympia also saw a flourishing of other arts associated with the games. Music, poetry, and sculpture. All these creative forms reached new heights, inspired by the spirit of competition and the pursuit of perfection. Musicians composed hymns in honor of gods and heroes, and poets composed odes extolling the beauty of the body and the strength of the spirit. Artists strove to capture ideal proportions and the harmony of movement in their works. This period was a time when the Greek world, despite its internal strife, found a point of attraction in Olympia, a place where shared values prevailed over political differences. Athletes from various cities, feuding on the battlefield, became rivals here, on sacred ground, not enemies. The truce declared for the games was not just a formality, but a profound recognition that there was something more important than immediate political gain. The air of Olympia was filled with grandeur. Every stone, every olive grove, every sculpture, everything radiated an aura of antiquity and enduring glory. The games were more than just a sporting event. They were a ritual linking the past, present, and future. They were a celebration of life, a hymn to human potential, and a testament to the unwavering faith in the gods, patrons of the entire Hellenic world. The Golden Age was the apogee, the pinnacle to which generations aspired, a time when dreams became reality and the names of heroes became eternal.
It was a time when everything held dear by the Greeks, honor, glory, beauty, strength, faith, found its highest expression. And the echo of this glory, like the quiet whisper of the wind, reaches us through the millennia, reminding us that true greatness is born of struggle and devotion to one's ideals. But even at the height of its glory, the Golden Age held within it a harbinger of change. The stars that shone so brightly above Olympia knew that nothing lasts forever. The tension in the air was not only the anticipation of new victories, but also the invisible currents that were already beginning to reshape the landscape of the world. While each athlete returning with a laurel wreath felt on top of the world, time itself moved inexorably forward.
The greatness achieved during this golden age was not the end of the road, but merely one of its brightest chapters. Chapters written with sweat, blood, and unwavering will on the sands of the Olympic arena. During this period, when the games reached the peak of their popularity and significance, their symbols became even more multifaceted. They went beyond simple athletic triumph. The laurel wreath, for example, became a symbol not only of victory, but also of the peaceful resolution of conflicts, as it was awarded during periods of general truce. The victors' statues erected at Olympia served not only to perpetuate their names, but also as a reminder that even in a world rife with war, there was room for fair competition and the pursuit of excellence. This was not just a flourishing of athletic disciplines, but also a profound understanding of them. Each type of competition, from the swift running to the grueling wrestling, carried a specific symbolic meaning, reflecting various aspects of life and the ideals of Greek civilization. Running represented speed and agility, wrestling strength and endurance, and the discus and javelin throws precision and power. During this golden age, the games became a unique center of Hellenic identity. Here, on sacred ground, people from different cities, speaking different dialects, feeling part of a single cultural space, could see and feel their commonality. It was a time when the spirit of unity, however fragile, was particularly strong, sustained by a shared festival, shared heroes, and shared gods. Images associated with Olympia permeated a wide range of spheres of life. They inspired philosophers, poets, and artists. The ideal of a harmoniously developed person, a combination of physical strength, intellectual prowess, and spiritual purity, found its embodiment in the image of the Olympic champion. This ideal became a beacon to which all Hellenic society aspired. However, as is often the case with the greatest achievements, the Golden Age could not last forever. Even at the brightest moment of dawn, one could feel the gentle breeze of the evening. The symbols that shone so brightly carried not only reflections of glory, but also hints of changes to come. During this period, when the games were at the height of their power, they became not only a venue for athletic competitions, but also a forum where the fates of not only individual athletes, but also entire cities were decided. Diplomatic negotiations, alliances, and dispute resolution all took place in the shade of olive groves, amidst a backdrop of communal celebration. The air of Olympia was permeated not only with the scent of laurel and sweat, but also with the subtle aroma of intrigue, ambition, and hope. Every winner, every envoy, every spectator, all were part of this grand mosaic, where athletic honor intertwined with political games.
The Golden Age was a time when the Hellenic world seemed to have reached its apogee. A time when the ideals of beauty, strength, and honor found visibly manifest. But even in the brightest moments of the sun, the shadows lengthen, heralding sunset. It was a time when the grandeur of Olympia was undeniable, when every athlete who stepped onto the sacred sands felt the weight of history and the grandeur of the moment, when the names of the victors were written not only in the annals, but also in the hearts of people. It was during this period, when Olympia's glory reached its zenith, that the Games became a truly pan-Hellenic event. They united disparate city-states, creating an illusion of unity, albeit temporary.
This golden age was the culmination of 1,000 years of history, a time when all the aspirations, all the ideals, all the hopes of the Greek people found their fulfillment on sacred soil. The laurel wreath, a symbol of victory, became more than just an award, but a sign of special status. The victors at Olympia not only gained personal glory, but also became heroes of their cities, their names immortalized in poems, sculptures, and folk tales. This golden age was a time when myths came to life before the eyes of thousands of spectators, when heroes stepped from their pedestals and demonstrated their might and valor. The symbols of Olympia permeated all aspects of life, from the architecture of temples to the form of pottery, from poetic lines to philosophical discourse.
The grandeur of the Games was reflected in the grandeur of everything Greek civilization created. This period became a benchmark, a model to which subsequent generations aspired. And although the air of Olympia was filled with a sense of eternal celebration and enduring glory, deep down everyone felt that this time, however wonderful, could not last forever. But while the sun stood at its zenith, the echoes of Olympic glory rang especially loudly, filling the world with energy and inspiration. The golden age of games was a time when human potential seemed limitless, when body, spirit, and will merged into one, creating images of perfection. And these images, etched in stone and in memory, became eternal symbols of the human striving for greatness. Thus, the zenith of greatness, the golden age of the Games, was more than just a period of athletic flourishing. It was a time when the entire Hellenic civilization, its ideals, its values, its aspirations, found their highest expression. A time when the symbols of Olympia became symbols of everything dear and sacred to the Greek people. And this bright light, kindled on sacred ground, illuminated the path for many generations, reminding them that true greatness is born of struggle, devotion, and the pursuit of excellence. The golden age, like the setting sun, could not last forever. The sky above Olympia, so recently shining pure blue, began to be covered in shadows.
The wind, which had once gently fluttered the victor's ribbons, brought with it uneasy echoes from outside. The great games, a symbol of Hellenic unity and peace, gradually began to feel the breath of a changing world. On the distant frontiers, where the familiar Greek land ended, something else was growing and gaining strength. Empires whose borders stretched to the horizon no longer regarded Olympia as a sacred island of peace. Their views were different, more pragmatic, aimed at power and dominance. Rome, that indomitable colossus, was gaining strength, its legions marching along roads that had recently been mere paths. Their interests were far removed from the Agons and the Olympian spirit. Their laws, their order, their ways were different. The Greeks themselves, once united in their pursuit of athletic excellence, were also changing. The political fragmentation that had always characterized the Hellenic world was becoming increasingly palpable. City-states, once united under the banner of the Games, now increasingly found themselves on opposing sides. Disputes over power, territory, and influence overshadowed the former harmony. The Olympic peace, once solemnly declared before the Games, became increasingly fragile, increasingly nominal. As external threats escalated and internal conflicts deepened, the Games themselves began to transform. The luxury and spectacle that once reflected greatness of spirit became more ostentatious, even excessive. The sincere pursuit of honor and glory was replaced by a desire to demonstrate wealth and power. Competitions, once accessible to any free Greek, became increasingly influenced by money and politics. Wealthy citizens, and sometimes entire cities, sought to field the best, most expensive athletes, paying for their training and guaranteeing their victory. This gave birth to a new generation of athletes. Not those whose bodies and spirits had been forged by years of training in modest conditions, but those who were more like tools in the hands of patrons. Their victories, though seemingly brilliant, bore a tinge of artificiality, a hint of compromise. Athletes became objects of trade, their bodies a commodity, their successes a form of advertising. A sense of sacred duty to the gods and to their polis gradually gave way to professionalism, which, for all its effectiveness, deprived the Games of that pristine purity, that divine awe that had reigned at Olympia in earlier centuries. The rules themselves changed too. In some cases for the sake of spectacle, in others to attract larger crowds, competitions became more brutal, more bloody. The apotheosis of this trend was, of course, pancration, but even in more traditional disciplines, the boundaries of what was permissible were blurring. Referees, once incorruptible and wise, became susceptible to influence. Corruption arose, and with it mistrust. Athletes, coaches, spectators all began to sense that the sacred ground of Olympia was losing some of its former aura. It's not as if everything faded suddenly. No, even in these troubled times, there were athletes whose valor and dedication inspired admiration. Their names, like the last stars, shone long afterward in the darkening sky. But the overall mood was changing. The sense of celebration, albeit tinged with anxiety, gave way to tension. The sense of brotherhood that had once united all the Greeks at Olympia was crumbling at the seams.
Along with these external changes, Greece itself was also changing. The Hellenistic period, beginning with Alexander's conquests, brought with it new cultures, new languages, and new ideas. Greek civilization spread far beyond the Balkans, but at the same time it began to lose its uniqueness. Olympia, as a symbol of pure Greek tradition, found itself in a new, more complex reality. The Romans, first as spectators and then as rulers, began to exert increasing influence over the games. Their pragmatism, their love of spectacle, their desire to organize everything led to changes that weren't always in keeping with the spirit of ancient traditions. Roman emperors, some of whom were passionate fans of the games, others merely exploiting them for their own political ends, sometimes intervened in the competitions, sometimes changed the rules, and sometimes even participated themselves, demonstrating their ambitions. This period was a time when the past collided with the future, when ancient rituals and traditions were tested by time, new realities, and new threats. The seemingly unshakable grandeur of Olympia began to fray, like the finest silk, under the pressure of the coarse threads of history. Fanfares still echoed in the Olympian air, but their sound was growing fainter. The roar of the crowd, which once filled the sacred valley with joy and rapture, was now occasionally mingled with murmurs of discontent or bewilderment. The athletes entered the arena, but their faces reflected not only a desire for victory, but also shadows of doubt, shadows of weariness from a world that was becoming increasingly incomprehensible. It was during these years, when the world around us was changing at a dizzying pace, when the ancient gods seemed to be turning away from their sanctuaries, that it became clear. The golden age of gaming was approaching its end. Not a sudden decline, but a slow, gradual decline, like a dying fire dying down, leaving behind only smoldering embers and the ashes of memories. But even this fading had its own sad yet majestic beauty. It was a farewell to an era, to ideals, to a way of life that once seemed eternal. It was a time when tradition, faced with the onslaught of new realities, began to seek new forms, new meanings, or gradually gave way, leaving behind only echoes of past glory that will long resound in the hearts of those who remember. The sun, once blazing at its zenith, now sank toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the sacred land. These were the shadows of coming changes, the shadows of a passing era. And although the Olympic Games continued to be held, their former glow began to fade. The greatness that had once seemed unshakable was now being tested. Tests that would not pass without leaving a trace. The world was changing. Empires rose and fell. The gods seemed to be fading, giving way to new powers. And Olympia, as the living embodiment of a vanishing world, began to feel the full weight of these changes. External threats, like a gathering storm, became increasingly real. Internal changes, like a slowly smoldering fire, eroded the foundations of ancient traditions.
The sacred fire lit on the altar of Gaia, which had once symbolized unity and peace, now seemed but a reflection of its former self.
The athletes whose names were carved in stone gave way to new heroes, whose exploits were perhaps no less significant, but no longer carried the same pristine purity. It was a time when past and future intertwined, creating a complex and dramatic picture. A time when a great tradition, like an old tree, began to bend under the weight of years and winds, yet still retained its strength and dignity. The sunset over Olympia was more than just the passing of day and night. It was a symbolic reflection of the fading of an entire era, the fading of a world where ideals of beauty, strength, and honor were embodied in grand athletic celebrations.
It was a time when tradition clashed with reality, when the outside world encroached on sacred precincts, and internal changes eroded seemingly unshakable foundations. The voices of the spectators, once full of delight, now sometimes sounded tinged with anxiety. The sound of the wind, once soothing to the ear, now seemed to whisper of coming changes. It was a time when the echoes of Olympia's glory gradually faded, giving way to new sounds, new realities, new challenges. And though the final years of splendor, the last flashes of former glory, lay ahead, no one could deny that the golden age of Olympia was drawing to a close. The world was changing, and with it the games themselves were changing, giving way to new times, new orders, new histories.
But even in this decline, in this twilight, there was something eternal, something that will forever remain in the memory of humanity, the memory of the pursuit of perfection, of fortitude, and of the beauty of fair competition. The final chord of the ancient games sounded not loudly, but rather like a quiet sigh, dissolving into the evening air of Olympia. A centuries-old tradition whose roots were deeply rooted in sacred soil began to decline. It was not a sudden end, but rather a slow fade, like a fire dying down, leaving only smoldering embers. The emperors, whose power stretched from the cold shores of Britain to the hot sands of Egypt, began to view the games differently.
Their interests shifted. Their ambitions demanded new conquests, new triumphs that did not always require the blessing of Zeus. The influence of Christianity grew like a mighty tree, sending its roots ever deeper into the fertile soil of Hellenic culture. The new faith, with its strict prohibitions and different worldview, could not reconcile itself with pagan rituals, the worship of statues of gods, and athletic competitions which were inseparable from religious worship. Sacred groves, where for centuries the voices of athletes and the enthusiastic cries of spectators had echoed, began to seem alien, filled with the echoes of a bygone era. With each passing century, with each passing generation, the game's luster faded. The great emperors who had once generously supported them now saw them as nothing more than an expensive, outdated spectacle. Funding dwindled, and the once lavish celebrations became more modest. The training halls where the greatest athletes had honed their skills became deserted. The marks left by heavy discuses and javelins on the practice fields gradually became overgrown with grass. The air of Olympia, scented with olives and sea salt, was permeated with a sense of foreboding. The priests, whose voices had once resounded solemnly, now uttered ancient prayers with a tinge of sadness. They witnessed the dwindling number of pilgrims, the waning faith in the power of the Olympian gods. The majestic temples, erected in honor of Zeus and Hera, stood, but their stones seemed to hold not only the memory of the past, but also a quiet sorrow for the future. The final years of the ancient games were marked by both triumphant moments and obvious decline. Sometimes, as if in a last-ditch effort, the finest athletes from all corners of the empire would gather to demonstrate their strength and agility. For a moment, the stadium would once again fill with the roar of the crowd, and the old passions would flare up. But these were mere sparks illuminating the gathering darkness. In the 4th century A.D., when the empire was experiencing profound internal upheaval, the games became one of the first casualties. Emperor Theodosius I, a devout Christian, issued a decree banning all pagan cults and festivals. This was a blow that finally brought an end to centuries of history. The last games, according to various sources, were held in 393 A.D. Imagine this final Olympia. The sun, no longer as bright as before, breaks through a light haze. Silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of the sea, envelops the sacred hill. Athletes, perhaps the last of those who will compete according to the ancient rules, take to the field. Their eyes lack the former youthful enthusiasm, only concentration and perhaps a vague understanding that they are part of something grandiose, about to vanish forever. The last runner crosses the finish line. The last wrestler falls to the sand. The last discus thrower makes his throw. The spectators gathered here perhaps do not fully grasp the depth of what is happening. For some, it is simply the end of another festival. But for those who deeply felt the spirit of Olympia, for the priests, for the historians, for the poets, it was the end of an era. Following this decree, Olympia, once the center of world sport and religion, gradually sank into oblivion. Earthquakes, floods, and simply the passage of time eroded the once majestic structures. Statues of the gods were toppled, temples fell into ruin. The sacred ground, which had witnessed so much glory and suffering, once again became simply a hill covered in vegetation, keeping its secrets beneath a layer of earth and dust. The noise of the crowd died down. The echo of the fans' cries faded. Only the wind continued its eternal conversation with the ancient stones, telling them stories of what had been and what was to come. The fire that had been lit here in honor of Zeus was extinguished. The Olympic flame, a symbol of the eternal pursuit of perfection, ceased to burn in its original place. The silence that followed the final chord was deafening. It was the silence that comes after a momentous event, when everything fades away and only a memory remains. Olympia, the cradle of the ancient games, fell silent. Its majestic past became history, and its present a mere reminder of its former glory. But even in this silence, in this desolation, there was something that could not die. It was the desire for an honest fight, for self-expression, for the beauty of the human body and spirit. It was a seed that, buried for centuries, awaited its time to sprout again in a new world. The fading of the ancient games was the end of one chapter, but not the end of the entire history of the human quest for athletic glory. It was merely a deep breath before a new beginning, before a new era that would bring its own hymns and its own legends. And though Olympus sank into silence, its echoes lived on, penetrating the souls of those who believed in the power of sport and its eternal ideals. Olympia was plunged into silence. The sacred groves, once filled with the hum of thousands of voices, now whispered only to the wind. Temples erected in honor of the gods stood dilapidated, their columns reaching like petrified fingers toward an indifferent sky. The ancient flame, a symbol of unity and peaceful competition, had gone out. It seemed as if time itself had stood still, frozen above this place where the fate of nations was decided, where feats worthy of legend were accomplished. But even in this faded glory, in this silence that enveloped the ancient altar, the most important thing remained. It was a seed planted over centuries, a desire for perfection, for fair competition, for transcending one's own boundaries. It simply waited for new lands, new times, new hearts to breathe life into it once more. Centuries passed. The world changed beyond recognition. Empires rose and crumbled. Civilizations replaced one another like waves rolling onto the shore. But memory, like the sea, preserves its depths, its secrets. And then, on one of those nights, when the stars seemed especially bright and the air was saturated with the scent of salty wind and antiquity, a miracle occurred. A soft, barely audible sound, like the beating of a tiny heart, pierced the silence. It did not come from the ruins of Olympia, no. It was born far away, in another corner of the world, where people, as if heeding an unknown call, began to gather together once again to test themselves. This wasn't just a competition, it was an echo of those ancient times when athletes, naked and strong, stepped onto the sand to battle not only their opponents, but themselves. These were the first tentative steps of a renaissance. People, not yet comprehending the full depth of what was happening, once again felt the very same drive that had driven the heroes of the past. The desire to prove their strength, their endurance, their will. The desire to feel part of something greater than mere individual existence. And then, as if awakening from a long slumber, people began to remember. Remembering forgotten names, forgotten rituals, forgotten ideals. The images of athletes racing across the stadium, the strength of wrestlers tensing their muscles, the grace of gymnasts soaring through the air, all of it began to come to life. Not immediately, not suddenly, but steadily, like the sun breaking through the clouds. History, it seemed, had come full circle, returning once again to its roots, to what was dear and precious. New arenas appeared, glittering with metal and glass, where the roar of the crowd was no less deafening than that which once thundered at Olympia. But now this noise was imbued with a different meaning. It was not just the roar of the fans, but also a hymn to the human spirit, a hymn to the pursuit of progress.
New lights were lit, but in their flames, if you looked closely, you could see reflections of the very fire that burned in ancient Greece. A symbol of unity, a symbol of peace, a symbol of the eternal search for perfection. Modern athletes, clad in vibrant costumes, no longer revealed their bodies, but their spirit remained the same.
The same fire burned in their eyes as their predecessors. The will to win, the willingness to sacrifice, respect for one's opponent. These qualities seemed ingrained in human nature itself. And sport, in its new modern guise, became the bridge that connected the past with the present, legend with reality. With each new competition, with each new record, it became increasingly clear. The ancient games had not disappeared without a trace. They had transformed, adapted, but their essence remained intact. It was a legacy that lived on, inspiring new generations. It was a renaissance that proved that true values are timeless. Like seeds, they may be buried underground, but sooner or later they will find their way to the light.
And so, when you look at these modern arenas, at these athletes striving for their goals, you realize that the echo of Olympus resonates even today. It resonates in every heartbeat, in every tense muscle, in every sigh of relief after a grueling ordeal. It resonates in the unity of nations who, even if only for a moment, forget their differences to admire together the strength and beauty of the human spirit. These are the echoes of centuries that, having penetrated time, once again filled the world with meaning, hope, and faith in a better future. And this sound, quiet but persistent, continued to live, filling the space around, promising that the history of humanity, the history of its aspirations and its victories, would continue. A silence like ash descended upon the sacred hills. The wind, once carrying the cries of the crowd and the clanging of metal, now merely whispered among the ancient columns, as if mourning the past. Time seemed to stand still, frozen in anticipation of what was to come. But history abhors a vacuum. Every sunset holds the promise of a new dawn, and every end is but the beginning of a new, unknown song. The Olympic Games, born of sacred awe of the gods and a primal desire to demonstrate one's power, were gone, leaving behind only an echo. An echo that, however, did not vanish without a trace. It hung in the air, penetrating the very depths of human memory, a reminder that true glory and true dignity are indestructible. Like stardust scattered across the galaxy, the particles of Olympus's majesty dispersed, but each one retained a fragment of the primordial light. Imagine the sun's rays penetrating the dense foliage of a centuries-old forest, touching the earth. So too, the memory of the games, buried beneath layers of history, again and again found its way to the light. It manifested itself in the pursuit of perfection, in tenacity of spirit, in the beauty of movement that still stirs hearts. This was more than just a sporting competition. It was a ritual connecting generations, a reminder that within each person lies a strength capable of overcoming any obstacle.
The wind, playing with the last rays of the setting sun, carried with it the scents of herbs and the distant sea. It carried not sadness, but serenity. The serenity of an ancient world that had lived its life, left its mark, and was now passing into eternity, like a wise elder who, having exhausted all that had been said, finds peace. In this peace there was no oblivion. There was only transformation, a transition from one state to another. Every discus throw, every leap, every runner's step, all of it was part of a single great dance. A dance performed in honor of the gods, in honor of heroes, in honor of life itself. Now that dance has died down, but its rhythm continues to beat in our hearts. It can be heard in the blows of the hammer, in the whistle of the wind, in the joyful cries of newborns. It is a melody that will never cease to sound. The stardust of Olympus is more than just a metaphor. It symbolizes that even after the last fire has died, even after the last walls have crumbled, true greatness will continue to shine. It will live on in legends, in poems, in stones that preserve the memory of days gone by. It will live on in each of us when we dare to dream, when we strive for the best, when we show kindness and respect to others. Time, which had seemed to stand still, began to flow again. But now it flowed differently. It flowed filled with the wisdom of the ages, the tranquility of a completed journey, and the eternal promise of a new beginning. Like a river flowing into a boundless sea, the games of antiquity reached their natural conclusion, becoming part of something greater than themselves. And in this silence, in this soft light of the fading day, one can hear that eternal melody, the melody of honor, the melody of strength, the melody of the human spirit. A melody born on Olympus, and which will resound as long as the world exists. It is the stardust that has showered the mountain peaks, and it continues to shine, illuminating the path for those who come after.